I'm Mindy Corcoran. I'm the president of the Faith Always Wins Foundation. And the Faith Always Wins Foundation promotes dialogue for the betterment of our world through kindness, faith, and healing. The Faith Always Wins Foundation was created and put into action because of murders that happened in April of 2014 at the Jewish Community Center. Hate was involved, and someone wanted to murder other people who didn't have the same faith as he did, and who didn't look like him, and he thought weren't like him at all. And that individual murdered my father and son, and also Terry Lama. And so we started Faith Always Wins, and then Faith Always Wins Foundation started 7 Days, Make a Ripple, Change the World. Thank you so much for joining us. We can't do anything without our sponsors. And I have to tell you, we were doing really, really well all the way up until about March 17th on gathering sponsors. And we're so thankful for the people that did go ahead and join us on sponsorships, because really when everything started happening with COVID-19, we were all affected and our lives all went a little crazy for several weeks in a row. I feel like maybe people are starting to settle into what their routines are. But basically, we kind of had to stop seeking funding at that time, and we let it lay low. But these are the sponsors that we have. And if you know any of the people that work at these companies or have helped us, would you please tell them thank you? We really very much appreciate all of our sponsors. Advent Health is our one of our presenting sponsors. And yes, we actually do have someone who donated $15,000 and opted to be anonymous. We also have in-kind sponsors and other partners. So please take a look at that. And again, if you know people, friends, relatives who work for those companies, or if you're associated with those companies, we thank you very much. We also have partner cities. And I'll tell you what a partner city does in just a moment, but these are our partner cities. So if you happen to live in any of these communities, they have agreed to be a partner city with 7 Days. And so also this past week, we were able to garner videos from most of the mayors from each of these cities who were able to promote 7 Days on their social media as well. This is what our partner cities do. If your city was not listed and you want your city to be a partner city, please reach out to us in the next week, and we will talk to them about 7 Days 2021. They aren't hosting blood drives right now, but they do typically, and they help out, and they also are sending us our city proclamations. We aren't meeting at the city council meetings as we haven't had in the past, but they're still providing us a lot of services, and they're communicating with their constituents, and then we share our material with them, and they share it with the people who live in their community. One aspect that might be new to you, or you might not be aware of, why we partner with charities. So we partner with 14 charities every year. And the reason we partner with the number 14 is because when Reed was murdered, my son, he was 14 years old. And many things that we do in 7 Days have to do with Terry, my dad, William Corcoran, and Reed. And this in particular has to do with Reed being 14. So we partner with 14 charities. What does that look like to you? Well, we don't share money, but we share people. We share you as people. So we're introducing you tonight, in case you didn't know, to 0 Reasons Why, hashtag 0 Reasons Why. And we're also introducing you to Operation Breakthrough. Some of our charities that we partner with are the same each year because one of the deceased had an association with them. So for instance, Operation Breakthrough is one of our long-standing charity partners because Reed was performing his Eagle Scout project for their pantry at the time of his death. There are other charities like CCBI is one of our charities for Another Day, and they're on our list too because Terry Lama worked at Children's Center for Visually Impaired. The reason that we have those charities, I didn't get to that point. So they're 14 because Reed was 14, but I know personally that Faith Always Wins and 7 Days was my onward. And I want other people to be able to find their onward too. We all have something that is causing disruption in our lives at some given time. And actually, it's really odd that right now, every one of us in the entire world has something that's causing us a big disruption. And so to find your onward, what we recommend you do is find someone to go help. And that's going on a lot right now, is finding people to go and help. Well, maybe you didn't know about 0 Reasons Why, and maybe you didn't know about Operation Breakthrough. So now that we've introduced you to them, maybe they can be your onward. I want to let you know that for every committee that is involved in planning 7 Days, and there are over 45 people who participate for about 9 months putting 7 Days together. 22 of those are high school students, and they are our Kindness Youth Leadership team. So I wanted to let you know that we have those students helping us, and there are 2 students associated with this event as well. Here's our Love Day committee. So Jill Anderson runs 7 Days. She's the director of 7 Days. But the 2 chair people for this committee are Cindy Bowling and Kelly Haas, and they're featured in that photo that you're looking at. And then the 2 Kindness Youth Leadership team members that are helping with this event are Haley Hayton and Lucas Lowson. And that brings me to our moderator and our panelists. We have had the pleasure of listening to Nicole Price interview each one of these panelists since March 26th. Dr. Emmanuel Cleaver got to go first on March 26th, and we were glad that he did. He happened to be ready, and we put him on, and we started working through that, but now they're all 4 here present. And so I want to let you know that Dr. Emmanuel Cleaver is the pastor at St. James United Methodist Church. You could read also all of their bios on our website. And Reverend Kelly Isola represents the New Thought faith tonight. And she is a member of the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council. Among other things, she's a coach and a consultant. Lama, Matt, Palden, Gocha. Lama, Matt, and I work together on a lot of things Faith Always Wins Foundation. And Lama, Matt is the spiritual director at the Rime Buddhist Center in Kansas City, Missouri. And then Rabbi Rudnick. So Rabbi Jonathan Rudnick is the chaplain for the Jewish Family Services. And I'm just going to hand it off to Nicole Price now. She's been amazing, and you are in for a treat. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Mindy. Bias gets in our way in lots of different ways and methods. And so what we want you to do right now, if you're one of the 133 people who are on, is we have a video that we want you to watch. And as you watch this video, I want you to think about what are the things that the skier has to do to make progress. So if you would please, using the chat feature, if you could just capture as you watch, what are the things that the skier has to do to make progress? And we'll do a little debrief at the end.
Have fun.
I'll do it. Well, here goes something, I guess. Oh, okay, you can do this. I'm gonna jump.
You got it.
Whoa, my ski's slipping off.
Just remember, never snowplow, okay?
No snow plows.
Keep it straight, you'll be fine.
Okay.
You can do on the 20.
Straight. Do you go faster on the in run?
A little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah.
Is it any steeper, do you think? Not much?
Same steepness, it's just longer.
Well, just longer. Just longer. Just a bigger 20, that's all.
Yep. Have fun.
Bigger 20. Go ahead. You got this. I got it. It's fine. You'll be fine. Okay. Here. The longer you wait, you'll be more scared. I go. Just the suspense at the top at the first time freaks you out. That's the only thing. It's so fun. Huh? 60 seems like nothing now. Woo!
I see lots of comments coming in the chat. Please feel free to keep sending those in. One of the things that I love about that video, it's part of some content that I teach around personal accountability and coaching, and just it highlights the way that small breakthroughs, all of the things that some of you are saying, overcoming fear, self-affirmation, listening to trusted colleagues, are things that we have to do in order to be able to make progress. And I started using this video in sessions about bias, because whenever I would ask that question, what does the skier have to do to make progress? When people would share the small breakthroughs that people had to do to make progress, they would use the pronoun he. and the skier is a little girl. Now, what I don't want you to think is that you should be ashamed if you thought that the gender of the skier was a boy. What I do want you to think is that we all have biases, conscious and unconscious, which is what has brought us all here today as religious leaders. And so I would first love to hear from you, Reverend Isola, about would you tell us a little bit about New Thought and explain in simple terms, just 3 minutes if you would, what does it mean to be a New Thought leader?
So New Thought is in some ways a contradiction in terms, because it's not new and it's not all about thought. So it's a simple way, is it really is about a philosophy, a way to think and see and feel about the world from the inside out, and how we create our world with our thoughts, with our feelings. And it's really a way of life. So it's a life philosophy for spiritual practices, as opposed to, there isn't really a set of, creed or dogma or here's what you need to believe. There are some basic principles that run the spectrum of New Thought, and like most faith traditions, there are different, the word I use is flavors, but different threads, different expressions. So under the New Thought umbrella, there's science of mind, there's religious science, Centers for Spiritual Living, there's Unity, which is my affiliation, there's Christian Science. And so there's this broad spectrum of interpretations of the philosophy, the idea that there's one presence and one power, which is not the idea that there is a God outside of me, and I ask this entity for things, which then leads to the idea that one of the spiritual practices in New Thought is affirmative prayer. We're affirming that this one presence and one power that is inherently good and always available to us, we use to shift ourselves from thoughts that are not life affirming, that are not about just being my most noble self in the world. So New Thought is really a life philosophy of there's one presence and one power active in the world, that we are each endowed, we are each that principle in our own limited expression, that through the power of our thoughts, through the power of our feelings, our intentions, we create the world around us. We create our internal world. When you chew on a thought that's not very kind, it sort of expands, and all of a sudden you're in your own little shame spiral. And we also do that outside of ourselves. The same is true when we think affirmative thoughts. We think thoughts that are, or we hold on to emotions and thoughts that are around gratitude. It expands, right?
Reverend Isola, is there a doctrine that I could find that would tell me about New Thought?
Not really, and that's why it's sometimes it can be a little bit challenging, because there's not each of those. So Unity, you could go to unity.org to find out about Unity. You could go to Centers for Spiritual Living to find out about Centers for Spiritual Living, but they all have this foundational belief, that there is this one presence and one power, and we use that principle, that one divine idea that you might call God, Spirit, the great web of life, to create this world that we live in.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And we'll come back to New Thought a couple times throughout the hour. So I know you're excited.
There's no such thing as a short elevator speech.
I'd certainly get that. Now, right before this call, Rabbi Jonathan Rudnick put me to task, and he was like, Nicole, will you tell me what are the major tenets of Judaism? And I was like, oh gosh, I might be stuck. Rabbi Rudnick, would you please answer, just in simple terms, what does it mean to be Jewish?
So to me, being Jewish means to be part of a people who have an obligation internally to each other and externally to the world. There's a parallel, whereas among the Jewish people, if we go back to the Bible, there are 12 tribes, and anyone who knows anything about family systems and family dynamics knows how complicated 12 tribes inside of one people can be, right? But similarly, the parallel is the Jewish people are one people among many peoples that make up the world. Jews literally, the word Jewish means thanks. So being Jewish is about being grateful. And traditionally, the first words of prayer that we say in Judaism upon waking up are thank you for another day of being in this world and trying to figure out why we're here and accomplish some part of that. Another thing Jews are known as are crossers of rivers, of journeyers. That's the word Hebrews, right? And that's the language Hebrew is because it's spoken by a group of people called the Hebrews. And it literally means to cross over, right? And so you're on a journey. And then finally, we are also in the Bible known as, wrestlers at the riverside. And this refers to the word Israel, an all-night wrestling match that happens in the Bible. But it's not just about the wrestling and the grappling. It's about wrestling to try to become more able, which is literally what the word Israel is. And I would say, it is paradoxical that the Torah begins not with a Jewish story particularly, like the Exodus from Egypt, for example, but it begins with the creation of the world. And there's nothing particularly Jewish about that, other than the subtle or not so subtle reminder that you as a Jewish people are part of this world. And I, God, am interested in this whole world and everyone in it that I created. And thus then, we as a Jewish people, connecting and learning Torah, have to hold in tension at the same time both the particular of being Jewish and the universal of being connected to the rest of the world.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Rabbi Rudnick. Why don't we just stick with the Abrahamic religions? Dr. Cleaver, are you ready?
I am. So to be a Christian, Christianity, the foundation of it rests on the resurrection of Jesus. You can make the argument that without the resurrection, you would not have Christianity. And although that's not the beginning of the story, it is the most important part of the story, the resurrection of Jesus. So to be a Christian means to be a follower of Christ, which means anointed one, and the anointed one is Jesus, anointed to come and save all of humanity from sin. And the sin is being disconnected from God. So to be a Christian is to follow Jesus. It is, Jesus taught probably the most revolutionary thing that he taught was to love those who hate you, pray for those who despise you. And in fact, there is a book called The 100 written by Michael Hart where he names the most influential people in human history. And number one is the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Number two is Isaac Newton. And number three is Jesus. And Jesus is number three, he argues, because one, the Apostle Paul was responsible for spreading Christianity more than anyone, which is true. But without Jesus, Paul doesn't spread. There would be no reason for him to spread the good news about the resurrection of Jesus. But he also argues that the most revolutionary thing Jesus ever taught was to pray for those who hate you, to love those who despise you. And by and large, we don't practice that. So in his mind, that sort of diminishes the influence of Jesus. He might have even argued, Michael Hart may have even argued, did Jesus practice that himself? And the answer is yes. While he was on the cross dying, he looked down at the people who put him there and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He prayed for the people who actually were responsible for his execution. I said all that to say is, as Christians, we're supposed to follow Jesus. It's not an easy task, but that is who we are as believers.
Well, I'm Christian too, and sometimes I I do pray for people like my husband, but when he does things that I don't like, I pray with him right there so that he can hear me praying for his salvation.
Salvation from you?
From my wrath, yes. That's good.
Oh.
You caught that. You caught that. You caught that. And last but not least, just last week, I had an opportunity to interview Lama Matt, who represents the Buddhist faith. Lama Matt, would you please share with us, what does it mean to be Buddhist?
Well, I think when we talk about what it means to be Buddhist, we are Buddhists are followers of the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived about 2,500 years ago. And we follow his teachings and his wisdom that he discovered all those many years ago. And Buddhism, for most people, is understood as the Four Noble Truths. This is the first teaching of the Buddha after his awakening, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of cessation, and then the truth of the path. And what that means is the truth of suffering is that all life, all samsara, the world of that we are in, is characterized by suffering. Suffering in this Pali is dukkha, which means unsatisfactoriness or stressfulness. And so as Buddhists, we reflect on our own lives to understand that suffering that we see. And then the Buddha taught not just that life is suffering, but the cause of suffering is ignorance, or not knowing the way the world truly is. That suffering also from that ignorance is because of desire and attachment, wanting things that we can't get, and then also aversion, being met with things that we don't want to be met with. And that causes or is the source of our suffering, our unsatisfactoriness, our stress. Then through his own life, he demonstrated the cessation of suffering, which is that even though there is the suffering or this dukkha in our life, that through a spiritual practice, we, like him, can become awakened and that we can achieve peace, or what we call nirvana. And then the final truth is really the spiritual path itself. It's called the truth of the Eightfold Path. And that's our ethics and our spiritual practice of right seeing or right understanding the way the world truly is, our right thought or intention of how we act within the world, right speech, how we speak, not only just our own verbal speech, but our mental speech, right action, how we engage in our ethical behavior in the world, right livelihood, so engaging in work that benefits beings and doesn't harm other beings, right effort, so perseverance and overcoming these afflictions, mindfulness and concentration, which is the introspective practice of seeing our own mind work and how our emotions arise within the world around us. But I think succinctly, if we look at Buddhism as in the words of the Buddha from the Dharmapada, where he said not to do any evil, to cultivate good, and to subdue one's mind, this is the teaching of the Blessed One. So that Eightfold Path really falls into those three things: to refrain from doing negative actions. In a Judeo-Christian concept, it would be stop sinning, to do good actions or good deeds with your life, and then to really subdue your mind, this attachment, aversion, and ignorance that we have that causes our own suffering. And so those, as a follower of the Buddha, is what we try to cultivate within our own faith tradition.
So will you tell me, how do you become a Lama? And I guess if it's different than appointment, I'd love to hear that from the rest of you as well. Lucas asked that question in the chat.
Yeah, so I would say the Lama just means teacher. It's a term that's used in Tibetan Buddhism, and there's many different ways to become a Lama. As the spiritual director of the Rime Buddhist Center, my title is Lama because at the Rime Center, I teach the Dharma, and I work with our Sangha members to help them on their path, to help guide them in their own practices. But really that the Lama just means teacher. I would say of all the spiritual traditions, I think when I've spoken with folks, the closest I see it is almost like the rabbi in a Jewish tradition.
We'll ask Rabbi Rudnick if he agrees
Yes.
with that. Thank you,
I
Lama.
looked at him as I said that.
So Lama Matt, I'd love to hear from you and Dr. Cleaver about what you do as faith leaders to promote understanding and acceptance of religions. And since we're already with you, Lama Matt, if you wouldn't mind just sharing, what do you do specifically to promote acceptance?
Well, I think the number one way that I promote acceptance is to live that truth. So I, through intentional actions, I reach out to other faith traditions to learn about them, to understand similarities and differences amongst us, to get rid of any unknowing or fear of the unknown that might be arising. And at the Rime Center, I encourage that kind of Rime, for the Rime Center, for those who don't know, is a Tibetan word that means non-sectarian. And I see that through our tradition as understanding the universal truths amongst all faiths, celebrating each faith in their own way, not trying to blend it, but to recognize the benefits that multiple faith traditions bring to the table, to the world. And so I really think, encouraging people to learn about other faith traditions, joining panel or joining webinars and Zoom meetings like this to learn about those folks who you may not necessarily understand their tradition.
Do you feel like that's consistent in Buddhism?
I think for many Buddhists, it can be. I think also, like many religions, there's sectarianism that can occur amongst the traditions. But I feel that in the modern age, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, because with the Tibetan diaspora throughout the world, they've really had to open themselves up to other traditions and other Buddhist traditions as well. And so you see this Rime philosophy, this non-sectarian philosophy really growing in Buddhism.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Dr. Cleaver.
Well, I would say first and foremost, probably not enough. But I would also add to that, participating in things like this is one way to promote unity among different traditions. And we've also, St. James has also done things with different religious groups and leaders, shared meals, different panel discussions. So we've had discussion, and we've done different events with groups from different religions, but by and large, I would say it's still probably not as much as we should.
Would you say that that's pretty consistent with other Christian pastors?
I would probably say we're probably ahead of the curve because one thing that Christianity, and I'm generalizing, tends to do is categorize sometimes people in just two different groups. There's the saved and unsaved, or believers and non-believers, as if there are only two types of people in the world. And so I think there are some teachings in Christianity that really, whether it's intentional or unintentional, really deter people from really connecting with others from another religion. So it's that's one of the critiques I would have about the faith tradition that I belong to.
Thank you for that. And I think that's a good lead into our next question. Reverend Isola, when you think about intolerance and sometimes thinking us versus them, can you think of a time when you were teaching your faith, but it may have promoted intolerance of others? And Lama Matt, I'd love to hear this about the Buddhist faith too, as soon as Reverend Isola is done.
Yeah, it's when you asked me the first question about sort of talking about, you know, specifics about New Thought, and then the question kind of shifted to what does it mean to you to be, you know, Buddhist or Jewish? And so, excuse me, I was sitting with that, like, what does it mean to be Unity or New Thought? And it sort of leads into the question you just asked me, because it's one of the challenges I've had over the course of ministering, and that discovering where I say things that are like, oh, I'm not sure that that's how I want to say that anymore. Or, you know, you realize I didn't know what I didn't know. For instance, teaching that very often in Unity churches, and I've said it, you know, not for a while, but that there's, you know, one path, many paths to one God. And somewhere along the line, I thought, oh, that doesn't work. For, you know, the more in my life I got involved in interfaith work, and then being the chair for the Interfaith Council, and really being, you know, not just in Kansas City, but moving out in the country, hearing myself, and it's still a teaching, and I understand the teaching. There are many paths. That's the thing about Unity and New Thought, is that it can be fuzzy around the edges, but there is a teaching that of inclusivity, that everybody is welcome here, and how you identify is not the hot issue, and yet there's this idea that there are many paths to this one God, or this one truth. And I have been tripped up by that, and I get challenged by that, because it's not.
You said that when we were in the interview together, and I would like to know a little more about that. So tell me specifically how that excludes other religions.
Well, not every religion believes in one God.
Right.
So I can say out loud that we're all inclusive, that everybody is welcome here, and then in the next sentence I'll say many paths to one God. Well, if someone is sitting there that is, say, a secular humanist, or you know, Hindu, or you know, pagan, you know, some other, you know, faith tradition that they call their home, now I'm sort of, you know, now I'm like, oh, really? You know, the intent is that everybody is welcome here. There are many paths, and you get to choose your path, and to believe the truth you can demonstrate, kind of thing. But it is a saying that I have struggled with over the years, that I sometimes cringe. I look around the room and see if anyone's uncomfortable when someone else is saying it. And there's other, you know, teachings that we have that because of all the interfaith work I do, I'm, you know, I hear things differently.
Yeah, you can be a little more sensitive to it.
Yeah, and I can be really annoying to some people because they don't want to hear it.
Well, the person who always calls out our biases, we tend not to be very tolerant of those people. We can take it a little bit, and then we start to get a little annoyed. I will tell you that one of the biases I have about Buddhism is that Buddhists are tolerant of everybody. So Lama Matt, I'm waiting for you to bust up my biases here and tell me how, what are some of the ways that you've taught things that are kind of intolerant of other people or groups?
Well, I think when we talk about intolerance in Buddhism in general, I think usually people do have that over broad view, like, oh, Buddhists are very tolerant. Yet I would always point to just internationally right now, the crisis with the Rohingyas and the Buddhist from Myanmar, just a conflict that's causing. And I don't think it's the religion itself. I think it's the nationalism that's spurring that. But I think it's very important, especially when people think about Buddhists, that, you know, we're not stainless or blameless when it comes to intolerance. I would like to say, though, the question was specifically about, you know, teaching and then recognizing that I may have promoted intolerance. And one of the things I have learned just from being the spiritual director of the Rime Center and teaching was that there's a lot of patriarchal language based in the scriptures of the Buddha, that there's a lot of systems that have been created in Buddhist countries that really favor male monastics over female monastics. And just being taught within that system, I've had to do my own introspection and look at my own patriarchal biases when it comes to doing teachings. A good example, and I shared this when we spoke in the prequel, was the notion of Tara, the liberator, this this enlightened being who became enlightened as a female. And the reason for that is because when the history or the story of Tara was as a princess or a devotee at the time, she wanted to become enlightened, and the teachers at the time said, well, it's better that you pray to be reborn as a male than to achieve enlightenment, because you can only do it in a masculine body. And she at that point rebuked them and said that she will take every rebirth as a female and then achieve enlightenment as a female to demonstrate that it can be done, as that enlightenment is not gendered, it's beyond gender. And so because of those discussions, I've really worked to now start to promote more understanding of Buddhism beyond gender, and also celebrating women in the Buddhist cultures, whether it's teachers or scriptures or other things that really lift up to bring equity to the masculine, feminine aspect of Buddhism.
Forgive this ignorance. Can I be a Lama?
Of course you can. Yeah. Again, it's Lama is a teacher, and in fact, there's we've been bringing a teacher. Her name is Lama Lena to Kansas City for, gosh, about 20 years, and it's probably one of the most inspirational teachers I've ever met in my life. And so, yeah, of course, you could be a Lama.
I thought I'd ask. You know, the church where I grew up, I couldn't be a pastor. I could preach. I couldn't be a pastor, though. Mindy, I am ready to do a poll question. And for all of our participants, let's see how many people are on. 149 participants. I'd love to know from my participants, how intentional are they about being accepting towards people of other faiths? So it's a true or false question. I am intentional, meaning I actually try to be accepting towards people of other faiths, and just pick true or false. The host and the panelists can't vote, but all 149 of our participants can, and we'd love to see what the answer to this poll question is before we move on here. Take a few seconds, go ahead and answer. We'll keep it up for maybe 10 more seconds or so. The statement is, I am intentional about being accepting towards people of other faiths. True or false? All right, we're about at 90%. So Mindy, if you could close the poll question and share the results so we can get a sense. 98%. And you know, I gotta say, I'm not surprised by that. The kind of people who would join tonight's call and session, I would think that you'd be more accepting towards people of other faiths. While we're here, let's go ahead and ask one more. We'd love to see how comfortable you are having friendships across religions. So not just accepting of those other people. Reverend Isola says it's easy to be spiritual in a cave. Now, who you're inviting over for dinner? How comfortable do you feel having friendships across religion? Meaning that you have friends who watch your kiddos, friends who help you move, friends. Very comfortable, comfortable, somewhat uncomfortable, uncomfortable. So we've got 149 people voting. I'd love to get some sense. Let's give them a few seconds here. In theory, these things work out great, but when we're called to task to actually demonstrate intentionality by having friendships, it gets to be a little different. And so let's see here. We've got 61% very comfortable, 35% comfortable, and then about 4% of our audience is somewhat uncomfortable. And then we had some people in the chat to share that they haven't met very many people who don't share their faith. So that's, you know, that's an honest answer. And I love that we can be honest with ourselves. So here, I have a question here for you, Rabbi Rudnick. What are the dog whistles in your faith? Meaning, what does your faith do or say that supports a bias, and it might not be as overt? It's kind of subtle.
So real quick as a lead-in, Nicole, I don't know how many people are familiar with, but in Los Angeles, the Simon Wiesenthal Center has something called the Museum of Tolerance. Could be said of tolerance/intolerance. And to get into the museum, there are two doors, and one is for those with prejudice and one is for those without prejudice. So I thought your polling question that when people chose yes, it was going to be impossible to choose yes. Because, of course, when you yourself try, as I did, to go into the non-prejudice entrance, it's locked, right? So you only can get through the door that acknowledges that we all have prejudice. Tolerance and bias doesn't get much more raw than gunning down three people, Reet and William, Bill, and Terry, for being in Jewish or other space. That turns out was very much their own space, even though they're not Jewish. I say that because I want to be a little raw here when I answer this question about dog whistle. So I'm going to give you the G word, okay, because that's the dog whistle among Jews. It's not really in Judaism so much as it is something cultural, I guess I would say. I need to reflect more on that, where it comes from. But the G word is goyim, okay? And goyim literally means nations. So in biblical terms, the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites are a goy, and all the other peoples are a goy, and together the plural is goyim. But what it really means kind of today in the internal language is the non-Jews, okay? And it definitely comes off as better than, smarter than. And the reason why it gets raw is because today, even though the day is waning, is still Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom HaShoah. And we have this troubling relationship between the Jews as a people, that I mentioned before at the beginning, and the other peoples of the world, right? So it warms my heart to hear Lama Matt refer to himself as a rabbi, and I will start calling him Rabbi Lama Matt, okay? And Rabbi Cleaver, Rabbi Isola, and all the other rabbis on the line, Rabbi Price, because I feel like we share that, right? And it is a very different historical reality to be alive today in a situation where people like the people on this phone call, the people on this panel, people like Reverend Adam Hamilton, people like Joel Carmer, who's a chaplain with Kansas City Hospice, who's a friend of mine, and others who stand up and with, right, when other people are being mistreated. So I'm very disturbed by this G word when we have this internal conversation. I can have a sense of where it comes from by being mistreated and having troubled relations with other people. But it leads to places that impede relationship today in situations where that precedent isn't necessarily the case, though we do have increasing anti-Semitism and don't have to look far for those kinds of experiences, like what brings us together now in contra to that. But still, it troubles me that that's part of the Jewish internal family conversation.
Would you spell the G word for us?
In Hebrew? So I guess it would be Goyim.
Okay.
Okay, and I would also just ask everyone, because I ask this of people in the Jewish community, because the kind of the innocent distinction that happens here is when we use the terminology of Jews and non-Jews. Okay. But that really gets into what Dr. Cleaver was talking about before, a very bifurcated world where everyone is either this or that, right? As opposed to people come from different spiritual traditions, and including the nuns, right, which is probably the fastest growing religious group, NONE. So, yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi Rudnick. For those of you who are watching, Rabbi Rudnick told me to call him Jonathan, and I just can't. I'm working on it. I'm trying.
Lama will be fine.
Okay, Lama Rudnick. Let's see if I can remember that. Dr. Cleaver, you once mentioned that the terminology saved and unsaved is a dog whistle in the Christian faith. Do you want to expound on that, or do you have some other dog whistles in the Christian faith that you'd like to highlight?
Well, I mean, it goes along the same lines as Lama Rudnick was saying, that, you know, it's really an us and them. It's just two types of people, which really separates others. But I mean, within Christianity, I think there are a few dog whistles, some subtle and some not so subtle. I would say one that has emerged over the last decade or so is when talking about Islam, to say, you know, you say Allah and God. It's subtle, but it's to suggest that Allah, which is God, means God, is not God. So you make that distinction. There's Allah, then there's God. So it's sort of a subtle jab. And, you know, a lot of it, of course, as many biases are and dog whistles are based out of ignorance. I have said to the members of St. James, and I believe this, that Christians are perhaps the most ignorant group when it comes to knowledge of their own religion, and don't perhaps see the connections that we have with other religions, in particular the Abrahamic faiths.
Well, that was that was a statement there, Pastor Cleaver. Well, I'm going to pivot just a little bit. Reverend Isola, did you tell me that you were raised Christian?
I was raised Catholic.
You were raised Catholic. So tell me how you agree or disagree with what Pastor Cleaver just shared.
Well, for the most part, I agree. It's Catholic is, depending on who you ask, there's Catholic and there's Protestant Christian, you know, so even with that, there's another bifurcation. And the teachings are not necessarily exactly the same across the board, you know, conservative to very progressive, but I would agree that even with the Catholic faith, I think many people who are not Catholic know more about Catholic faith than those of us that, like, I've learned more once I kind of stopped. I wasn't necessarily practicing Catholicism, but learned a whole lot more as I got older and doing my own studies. And that, yes, I agree probably with pretty much everything he said, that the more, just not realizing how connected we are and how much of, say, Christian faith. I mean, Christianity was born out of Judaism, and also takes some elements from other religions that were, you know, active in first century Palestine, like Zoroastrianism, and there's all these, you know, elements that make up a faith tradition that then eventually evolves over time. And I think where we get stuck is when there's no evolution. And so I think that's in part what Reverend Lama Cleaver is alluding to is also some of that stuckness, that concretization that goes on with, here's what you believe and you stick with that. And
now you just confused me. I thought he was Rabbi Cleaver.
Oh, Rabbi, Lama, Reverend, Doctor.
Yeah, there we go. You all need to change your name so I can keep it straight. So if you were raised Catholic, then that means it was Lama Matt who was raised Christian. Is that correct, Lama Matt? You were raised Christian and your family members are still practicing?
Yeah, we were, my family's Southern Baptist. So I always joke that I kept it in the B's.
Yeah, now, while I can be a Lama, I cannot be a Southern Baptist pastor. That I know. That I know. I'm very familiar with that. We had someone in the comments say that evangelical is a dog whistle for me. And Pastor Cleaver, when you and I were just the two of us doing your interview, you mentioned that. Would you be willing to expound on that idea of the evangelical Christian for me a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a dog whistle, and I think when I hear it, a lot of images come to mind. And the image that comes to mind is a white conservative living in the southeastern part of the United States, although there are these evangelicals all over. But I mean, that's the thought. And not only are they conservative, but one of the things that come to mind with a lot of people is that they are opposed to people who are unlike them in terms of race, nationality, and so on. Now, in my mind, I know that's not true. It's a generalization. But I think sometimes when the phrase is thrown out there, that's the intent that the one who says it, that they hope that those who hear it, that's the image that comes to mind.
You all are doing such a good job. People want to do this quarterly, so you need to start thinking now. We're getting all kinds of requests to do this more often and add a Muslim to the panel. So some of what you all have been talking about have been more dog whistles, kind of unconscious, subtle things. I'd love to know, Rabbi Rudnick, what are some of the more conscious biases towards other religions that you would say you see show up for Jewish people?
So I'm going to go with this one, Nicole, and it is being the chosen people. Okay. So whether in English or certainly in Hebrew, because there are certain times ritually when you invoke certain blessings and formulas in Jewish prayer that that say, thank you for choosing us. And I struggle with that a lot. I'm very conscious of it. So it's not a dog whistle, right? But it sets up a situation, and I find particularly among Christians who seem to be much more comfortable with the Jews being a chosen people than the Jews are as that chosen people. So that's an interesting thing we could talk about for a long time. I'm also reminded of Tevye the milkman in Fiddler on the Roof when he is talking to God and kind of looks upward and says, God, in the middle of Eastern Europe pogroms, attacks against Jews in this little town of Anatevka, says, God, I know that we're the chosen people, but couldn't you choose someone else sometimes? Right? So there's a lot of different perspectives that go into being the chosen people. And particularly when at the foundation of the Torah is the teaching that every single human being is created in the image of God. Right? And there are more particular parts of Judaism, there are more universal parts of Judaism, but it doesn't get, for me, more universal than that, right? So it is really something to grapple with. And, I've kind of come to this place that I end up hoping that all the different peoples of the world, whether they're religions, communities, ethnicities, cultures, whatever they consider themselves, would be able to have this sense that they were chosen, right, in some way for something, right, so that there's not just one chosen people, right? Because for that one chosen people, right, there are a lot of troubles, right, that come up. So do you really want to be on that team or not? But more importantly than that, it's really how it sets up the potential for relationship between people. And one of the reasons why I find myself and gravitated unconsciously and then more and more consciously to chaplaincy is the blessing of spending time around clergy. I use that kind of very broadly, from so many different faith traditions, all sharing the common commitment to be there for anybody in need in a particular setting, like a hospital or healthcare often, but not only, right? And then to get to know what are the blessings and the curses, respectively, to each of us of our own spiritual or religious tradition.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, Rabbi Rudnick was a chaplain. Are you still a chaplain at a hospital?
Well, I serve as the chaplain for Jewish Family Services, so I'm kind of the wandering Jew among hospitals and elder care centers in Kansas City.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that, because while I agree with it, I think it's beautiful to have friends and friendships. We've talked about how this group is going to get together offline whenever outside opens back up. Many of the people I know are very uncomfortable having dialogue and friendships and regular conversations about religion, even though there's so much similarity in what we're talking about here. So, you know, I'd love to hear, Reverend Isola, your new thought perspective on this idea of conscious bias. But I'd also love to add a follow-up question for you, which is, how do you purposefully create friendships across religion?
Well, the irony in New Thought, and I'll probably just narrow it down specifically to Unity, because that's my affiliation, and I don't know 100% of every New Thought expression, but there is this underlying unconscious, unexamined assumption of being intolerant of the intolerant. So there's these phrases you hear of, we're a spiritual community of like-minded people. As long as like-minded fits into my box of, you know, not using the word Father in a prayer, or not, you know, begging God for forgiveness, or a spiritual practice that moves outside of, you know, more general spiritual practices. And I think the one thing that really is a dog whistle that I struggle with is when I hear someone say that very often people come into New Thought or come into Unity, they were raised in a different faith tradition. And I hear people use the term, well, I'm a recovering Catholic, I'm a recovering Baptist, I'm a recovering whatever. And it really makes my heart hurt, because while I understand there may be some woundedness around whatever faith tradition they've chose to step away from, when you say I'm a recovering fill in the blank, you're really denigrating an entire faith tradition and making it very monolithic, and it's just not. And what it points me to, though, is that someone has some woundedness and some work to do, but it's a very, I hear it often, and for me it's really a dog whistle that I try to address when I hear it. And the like-minded thing, that you know, I'm like-minded as long as your mind is like my mind, which is way too homogenous for me. And so what I do in terms of, I've been doing interfaith work for so long that I'm more uncomfortable when there's not, you know, large diversity, and when there's not, you know, representation from many different faiths, because then it's too homogenous for me, and I want to be challenged. I want to understand. I want to learn more, because I know that everybody, whether you call yourself atheist or Jewish or pagan, we look at the world through our faith lens, and faith can mean just very simply how I make meaning of the context of my life, but it informs the glasses through which I look at the world. So I need to have an understanding of that, of the value system that is your operating system. And one of the best ways for me to do that is to be involved in something like this, to go have dinner at strangers' homes where I know there's other people of other faiths, to you know, get a group of people together that are of different faiths and try to plan a meal, you'll find out right quick what's going to work and what's not. And, you know, well, so we have a little, you know, we have some bacon on the table, just don't eat it. No, no, no. You know, I
No
continue.
bacon, no hamburger.
Yeah, I just continue to push myself. I continue to listen. I continue to watch. I look around at, for the most part, in New Thought, you know, the congregations are very white, and I notice it. And what's, you know, what's going on underneath it that kind of drives that, and the language that we use, and sometimes what I would refer to as almost spiritual arrogance. Well, I have evolved beyond that, as though whatever that was is not good. And I'm like, well, Unity New Thought is just another stop on this conveyor belt of your spiritual journey.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a stop.
When we all first met Reverend Isola, she said, well, was it witch? You said witches are, being a witch is also a religion or something like that.
Yeah, in pagan Wiccan, you know, earth traditions, some earth traditions, a witch is another, is a word for a leader, you know.
Yeah, she pushes us is all I'm trying to say. Rabbi and I've been praying about that since she said it.
I went to seminary with those who were a part of the Wiccan tradition.
Did you, Dr. Cleaver?
Yes.
Tell us more about that experience. What was the most interesting thing that happened, if you can remember?
The most interesting thing, it was a class on the doctrine of the Trinity. And for those who may not be familiar, just the concept that God has manifested God's self to us in 3 different forms: Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So in this class, we had to make a presentation. And one of those, a part of the Wiccan tradition, their presentation, I don't know how it got there. It was above my understanding, but they had, it wasn't 3, it was 10, and they were all women, a representation of the Trinity. And they explained it, but I still didn't quite grasp it, but I thought that was interesting that the class is the doctrine of the Trinity, but they're presenting God in this triune class as 10 and not
3.
1 and 3.
Not 1 and 3. Well, if it was
3 and 1.
If it was above the head of the extreme moderate, I think we all could probably use maybe an 8-hour session on it. We do have some questions from folks in the chat. This one's really simple for all of you. Just curious which day of the week each of these religions conduct services. Do you all welcome new people to attend, and what would it look like if I want to visit? Also, have each of you visited services of each of the others represented here? So it's a question, and just feel free to answer. Let's see. Let's go, Lama Matt. You want to tell us what at the Rime Center when you have service? And
sure. Our founder of our center temple created a kind of a hybrid Tibetan Buddhist and more of a westernized service. So we actually meet on Sunday mornings at 10:30 till noon. It's chanting and meditation, but it kind of gives people who come from a Judeo-Christian background kind of a familiarity with like a service, like a Sunday service. So that's what we do. And I've attended several different faith traditions a while back. Nowadays, trying to have time to share other faith traditions is difficult. So usually it's more of panels rather than going to actual churches and celebrating with them. But occasionally I do try to get out to other faith traditions and worship with them.
You're too busy to be in Baptist church all day. Is that what you just said, Lama Matt?
Oh, that's when I go see my grandma.
And for those of you who don't know, Lama Matt's family is still practicing Christian. Rabbi Rudnick, what about your worship service? Are they called worship services?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
And now, like everybody else, they are virtual worship services. So, of course, everyone's welcome no matter where you are. But in the physical realm, traditionally, We have more major worship services Friday nights and Saturday mornings around the Sabbath, beginning Friday night and then Saturday morning. And I mean, in general, people would be certainly welcome at any of the, from the different denominations of Jewish life, congregations that are here in the Kansas City area. And I have been privileged to be welcomed into churches, mosques, and I have not been to the Rime Center, though I've had some connections with people from there and some people who've gone into chaplaincy and participated in training. So for me, that's really important, is to step into one another's space. So I appreciate you not only asking, but also kind of as a challenge to continue to do that, because that is a way for me and for us to stretch and feel each other in different ways.
Thank you for that, Rabbi. Reverend Isola, what time do you all meet?
So I'm not in any particular Unity church because I work with churches around the country. However, that being said, most Unity churches do have services on Sunday mornings, and many of them also have something during the week that's more contemplative. That might be a meditation, a prayer service, because prayer and meditation is foundational healing work in New Thought. It's a thread that runs across. Of course, it, I think, runs across most every faith tradition. So most of them are Sundays. Now, of course, everything is virtual, so anytime. I have been attending other faith tradition services for many years, and one of my favorite things since we've been in lockdown is going to Central Synagogue in New York City on Friday nights to their Friday night Shabbat service. I just love it. And I lived in Arizona for 15 years, so I regularly was at powwows and have been involved in Native American practices and ceremonies for many, many years.
No, I have never been to a powwow there, Reverend Isola.
Yeah, and the Hindu Cultural Center, many pujas in Kansas City. I've been to the Rime Center. Trying to think of where I've not been. I just really, I just enjoy, I love how people choose to express what is most sacred and most holy. And however we do that, that rocks my world. And if it's with scripture or chanting or the silence, I love the Mennonite church in Kansas City because there's those long stretches of silence. And I love that. So
extrovert's nightmare.
Yeah. For some people, you have to train your brain, right? Lama Matt will get on board with that. You have to train your mind to be still.
Train your mind. Gotta get my mind to quiet down. Pastor Cleaver, what about your services?
Well, most Christians hold worship on Sundays simply because the resurrection of Jesus took place on Sunday. And so that's how that tradition began. Although more and more, especially some of the larger churches are having worship celebrations Saturday and Sunday, and some during midweek. Having grown up in Catholic schools, and I do consider Catholic the largest branch of Christianity, I know we went to Mass all throughout the week, which is one of the things I liked about and like about the Catholic tradition is they will have worship all throughout the week, and it was only 30 minutes.
What time is your service at your church in case people want to come?
Well, online right now, we're worshiping at 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Normally before this, we had 9, 10:30, and 11:30, but now we're streaming live at 9 o'clock. And if you don't catch us at 9 from our website, sjumckc.org, then you can watch it at any time.
I got a funny story about Catholicism. So my husband's Catholic, and I was raised Southern Baptist. And the first time I went to Mass with him, I actually thought Black church was a Black church. My husband's Black too, just in case you didn't know that. And so I'd been to Catholic Mass, but at a Black Catholic Mass, which was more like my church. But when I went to Catholic Mass with my husband, it's like regular Catholic church. And so the priest said something that I appreciated. And I don't even think I said amen. I know it certainly didn't wave a hand or anything, but it was something like, mm-hmm. And everyone just kind of looked like, girl, look, we're going to get out of here in 45 minutes. You need to be quiet. Like, just shut that thing up. Well, listen, you know, we are getting so many beautiful comments about us coming together. I mean it sincerely with everything in my heart. When outside opens back up, we've got to bring this crew together to go have coffee and break bread together and demonstrate truly what it means to be accepting, not tolerant, accepting of other religions. We had one person to say, when you are charged with going out and bringing more people into your faith, how do you do that in a way that honors and is accepting of other people and doesn't feel like you're pushing things on others? Do all of you, or do you all have the responsibility to bring other people into your faith? And if so, what does that look like? If not, then how do you grow?
So Christianity is a religion that part of our mandate is to go. One of the last things Jesus told his followers was, go make disciples. So evangelism, sharing the good news, is a part of what we are asked to do. Now, it can become a little pushy. I've had people, you know, try to convert me right on the spot. But what I tell people as a pastor, I say, you all will have more interaction with people who are not a part of a church than I do. Most of my interaction are with church folk already. And I know it can be a little uncomfortable for you to have that serious conversation. So what I say is, just invite people to come worship with you and check it out, and let me from the pulpit do all the uncomfortable sharing of what it means to be a follower of Jesus.
Okay, thank you for that. I practice permission evangelism. If you're hurting and you want to know how I'm not hurting, then I'll share, but otherwise I don't. Rabbi Rudnick, what about you?
I'll pass. No,
Okay.
I'm joking. Not only because I can't pass, but so first of all, there is no kind of obligation or extra points or, you know, theologically or otherwise in Judaism for bringing someone into Judaism or having someone become Jewish. That said, there are people who choose to become Jewish, and in my experience, that's been a blessing and very humbling to meet people like that and share in their journey in some way or another. But I think for me, I'm thankful that we don't have that, because underlying that theologically, it's very freeing for me. And I have seen a lot of particularly Christian chaplains grapple with this, right? How to serve a broad slice of humanity that aren't Christian, how to meet people where they are and be a kosher Christian sharing the good news at the same time. That is, I'm humbled by that challenge. I'm glad I don't have that challenge personally, right? The other thing I just want to add is, particularly because we don't have a Muslim brother or sister with us in this constellation this evening. So from what I understand from my friend Rashid, who is the place that my daughter has a Middle Eastern market, Shahrazad, on 127th and Metcalf, where my daughters say, Abba, you got to get cucumbers from Rashid, we're out, right? That I asked him just the other day when Ramadan begins, and he said it's supposed to begin on Friday. So, you know, I don't know if I can be so whatever as to on behalf of all of us, but certainly to be inclusive, to wish those greetings, Ramadan Kareem, on all of our Muslim friends, neighbors, colleagues, and so forth. If you get a chance to see, there's an imam, and I'm not even sure where he is, but Imam Majid was on this webinar yesterday about domestic violence. And he was speaking in so profound ways that were breaking stereotypes all over the place in terms of that particular issue, but in terms of what it looks like to be prophetic from within your tradition, to stand up for what is right, even when you're confronting your own tradition by doing that. So anyhow, thanks for the question.
Rabbi Rudnick, would you put that in the chat? Will you type out his name? I'm asking you to spell again, please, so that we have it. Reverend Isola, I saw that you were shaking your head no, that you don't have to, you're not required to bring people into new faith.
No, in fact, I would say that people actually have an allergy to it, like over, because I think to myself, okay, if this is like what you said, what'd you say, permission evangelism? I like that. The way I talk about it, if there's something about my life and how I live my life and my spiritual practices and that touches you or intrigues you or makes you curious, then by all means ask. As a general rule of thumb, though, I tend to operate, because in New Thought, it's about affirming the truth that already is. It's about affirming goodness, God, whatever word you use, that is already everywhere present. So we just affirm that. So what and we use a practice in our prayer practice is affirming what already is. So what I say to people is, we need to shift the direction of the energy. Rather than trying to get people into the building, get off your affirmations and get people out of the building. That's kind of my little phrase to, that we, again, it's easy to be spiritual in a cave and to move out into the world. And what was it? Reverend Dr. Lama Rabbi Cleaver said? Yeah. About, Jesus' teachings of to go out into the world. Very often a building says to stay in, to come in. And yet the teachings of most spiritual leaders over the millennia is to go out. And one of the main principal teachings in New Thought is to put feet on what you believe, which means caring for the least of my brothers and sisters, caring for life. All life is sacred. Now demonstrate that. Show me what you believe.
And your deeds. Thank you for that, Reverend Isola. Lama Matt, do Buddhists stand on corners and
No, thankfully
no?
not. I one of the things that I do appreciate, though, especially with the Rime Center, is that we get a lot of spiritual seekers. We get a lot of people who are looking at other faith traditions and look at Buddhism, or they see Buddhism as more of a philosophy than a religion. And so they're looking into that. And one of the things I always brings to my mind is His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, if there's something that you find beneficial in Buddhism and you're of a different faith, stay that faith and just be a better whatever it is of you. So if you are Jewish and you find something in Buddhism that speaks to you, let it make you be a better a Jew. Or if you're Muslim, let yourself be a better Muslim. Instead of thinking you have to convert, he's actually very much against people converting to Buddhism. He would rather people, just because of family dynamics and other things that can come up from that, he would rather people just take the teachings and apply them to their own faith tradition.
Thank you for that, Lama Matt. I, as someone asked, what's my faith tradition? I am Christian. I was raised Christian, so Christian, I don't remember when I converted. My parents were Christian and so were my grandparents. And one thing that my mother would always say was that good comes out of evil. And this time that we've gotten to spend here together is because of the horrible things that happened to Mindy's dad and her son. And when she was telling me how she knew Rabbi Jonathan Rudnick, she said that when they were at the hospital, that the person who was there to pray for her family was Rabbi Rudnick. But a little funny with that was that when he was ready to pray with the family, it was obvious he was Jewish from his garb. And one of Mindy's family members said, "But wait, we're not Jewish." And Rabbi was like, "And I would still like to pray with you." And so I am grateful for this time I've had an opportunity to spend with you. And I hope that each of you will add me to your prayer list. Please. Thank you. I need it.
I was reading the chat and listening and multitasking. And now that there's chat going on, I'm going to tell you, I'm probably not going to look down and read the chat, but I do have some notes that I'm supposed to follow up on. So I have some Post-it notes on my computer at the bottom. Before I start sharing my screen, I just want to let you all know that this came about, this interfaith panel has been going on for 6 years. When Dad and Ree and Terry were murdered because someone thought they were Jewish, one of the main tenets of Faith Always Wins Foundation, and one of the main messages that I felt I was given at that time, was I'm supposed to bring my people together. I heard God say to me, bring my people together. And I started looking around trying to figure out who is that? What is he talking about? Because I was raised Christian, and I remember thinking when I was younger that everybody was Christian. And obviously I've learned so much, and everyone is not one way. And I loved so many of the comments that were made. We're saving the chat. You know, it's just been amazing. And my journey has continued to open up my heart. And I liked, let's see, Kelly said, Reverend Kelly Isola said, get off your affirmations. And then Lama Matt just ended with, be a better, you know, fill in the blank, be a better. And I thought to myself, be a better human, you know, just be a better human. The other thing is, in our mission statements and in all of our language, you will not see the word tolerance. It's so much more than tolerance is what we're asking for. And we're asking for respect and understanding and holding hands together and breaking bread together, because no one should go through what our family went through. I want to thank our sponsors again, and we couldn't do it without our sponsors. I will tell you, I told, if you were on at the beginning, I said that we basically had to stop at the moment. We felt like we had to stop asking for funding, and so we did. But we do have a campaign going on right now. We are trying to raise the final $25,000 just to help us finish the programs that we had in place, and then it helps us keep going all year round. So this is our big flagship event during the year. And if you are already donating or busy donating to, you know, first responders or to food pantries or anything COVID-19 directly related, you don't need to give to Faith Always Wins. We're going to survive. But if you had extra funding and you really love this program, we would love it. You know, $10 and makes a difference when a lot of people give. And so also our next activities. So this is just the beginning, and the panelists were fantastic. Every one of you really touched so many people that were participating, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And it was mentioned pretty quickly that we didn't have a Muslim, didn't have anyone representing Islam. And I will tell you, in the past, we haven't had anyone representing New Thought, or we haven't had anyone representing Buddhism. We tend to stick around the Abrahamic faiths, and I'll tell you, because it's easier to do, and we're trying to broaden that as well. So we did that with this panel. And if you did see the chat, you'll see that on Monday, April 27th is our Go Day, and that happens to be our final day of 7 days, and we're embracing Ramadan. There are many other activities going on, so be sure and take a look at that. I just wanted to remind you, again, if you weren't on at the beginning, we do partner with charities, and our two charities that are on Love Day are Operation Breakthrough and Zero Reasons Why. And then I want to thank you. We will send you a survey. If you registered, we will send you a survey, and your answers to that question help us greatly. They help us in a couple of different ways. They help us understand what you thought about the program, liked, disliked, etc. But they also help us measure. So we asked you measuring questions when you registered, and we're going to ask you measuring questions on the way out. And we do apply for grants, and so we're learning how to measure what we do. So answering that survey helps us in a variety of ways. Nicole, it has just been a pleasure, such a pleasure. And to all of our panelists, so Reverend Dr. Pastor Cleaver, Lama Cleaver, thank you. And thanks for letting us pull you in early. So he started with us on March 26th, and I don't remember everyone else's dates, but we started this process on March 26th, doing these presentations in this format. And then Lama Reverend Kelly Isola, it's also been a pleasure, and I have always enjoyed talking with you, and I always feel a little on edge because yeah, Kelly has so many different thoughts about things, and I feel very almost infantile when I'm with her about my own faith and my own spirituality. I do learn more about Christianity when I'm around people of other faiths. And then let's see, Rabbi Lama Matt, thank you for being here and being part of my life and part of Faith Always Wins. Every time we ask, Lama Matt raises his hand and he is present. Thank you. And then Lama Rabbi Rudnick, thank you. Thank you. We appreciate you being part of our life and being part of the panel.